Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Thursday morning webinar series. I am Chloe Tetro, the coaching lead here for Ready Care. For this morning, we're going to be looking at the topic of stress. So I'm going to cover a few different things. I'm going to cover what positive stress is and what negative stress is, and more importantly, how do you tell the difference between the two of them? Some stress can be very helpful. It's a natural process in the body and it helps us to adapt to situations that demand just a little bit extra from us than the usual. Where is the tipping point where that little natural response can push us into a state that is emotionally, psychologically, and physically against our well-being? So that's what we'll cover a little bit of for today. If there's any questions, comments, please as always, pop them into the comment section. Love to hear from people. So we all experience stress. So it's a fact of life, and it is a positive and negative fact of life. According to a recent workplace survey, about 79% of employees regularly experience workplace stress. But despite how common it is, most of us are unsure when it's helpful and when it crosses the line into harming our health. So we'll unravel that confusion ever so slightly today. We'll look at how stress can be an ally in the right circumstances, something that helps us, and also pinpoint precisely when it begins to undermine our well-being. So my goal today is really to equip anyone watching, whether live or watching back, to have the tools to recognize basically when stress is serving you and when it's silently eroding your health, productivity, happiness, and experience of life day to day. So positive stress, what is it? There is such a thing, believe it or not. First and foremost, there is such a thing. Stress by itself isn't inherently bad. It's actually your body's natural response to perceived demands or challenges. You've heard that old fight or flight, there's a lion coming, you need to run, you need to fight. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide is coming to mind. But it's a very, very needed aspect of our survival, and not just our survival. It's not just in life or death situations. It's in gentle challenges. If you were somebody that's into bouldering, if you had a specific climb path that you'd never taken because you weren't audacious enough to try it, when you're up there and trying out new moves, positive stress kicks in, right? So it's whenever we're challenging ourselves beyond our element of comfort and stepping outside ever so slightly, stress comes in. When we're doing sporting activities, when we're doing presentations, when we're doing things that are just a little bit outside of the norm, we get flooded with a little bit of positive stress. So it's also scientifically known as eustress, EU stress, we've plenty of that, which sharpens your focus, boosts your energy, and prepares you to tackle important tasks. So during that big presentation, for example, your heart rate is going to increase slightly, your breath is going to quicken slightly, and your attention is going to hone in. It's going to focus. So what's happening there is your body's releasing stress hormones, including adrenaline and cortisol, to prepare you for what's known as peak performance. Any task that involves peak performance will have an element of stress involved in it. And that little hand signal I did here to zero in, it's essentially zeroing in your focus. Your focus is hyper aware. We'll get into that in a while as to when that can get a little bit skewed. So studies show that moderate short-term stress can actually improve your memory and concentration by about 20 to 30%, helping you to perform better when it counts. So as you can see, it's not just a case of stress equals bad, cortisol equals bad, because cortisol has loads of wonderful jobs around the body. So this positive stress acts as your personal performance booster. If I could say it now, I'd be winning. But the difference here being, once the challenge passes, your stress should also dissipate, right? The performance has happened, peak performance has happened, big clap, amazing promotions, fantastic. Your body should go back to kind of homeostasis and back to even keel. So your body expects recovery after the moment has passed. This is the natural balance of things. So when does it start to go a little bit off kilter? So there's two two types of ways that stress can show up. There's acute, which is cute, like the angle. It's happening at a very specific point in time. And then there's what's called chronic stress, or an obtuse triangle. So stress is beneficial if it comes in, comes out. Your response happens, your response leaves. Happy days. Now, the problem is when the stress aspect becomes chronic. Now, colloquially, we say chronic for jeepers, it's terrible, but chronic essentially just means it's been happening and happening and happening, and there's no let up. It's persistent, it's unresolved, it's constant. So according to the World Health Organization, chronic workplace stress affects nearly 1 in 4 adults. And I would actually throw my hat in to say, I would probably say it's more than that, because what happens when stress is persistent and constant, and you may recognize this from your own life or from people you care about in your life, is when one gets to a specific point of stress, it's happening so constantly that they don't even notice that they're stressed. They don't even realize that they're in this kind of wide-eyed, I'm fine, everything is fine. I'm not stressed. What are you talking about? You're stressed. That kind of approach, because we're so embedded in it. It's like that old story of the two fish swimming along, and somebody says, hey, how's the water? And the fish turn around and look at each other and say, what's water? What are they talking about? And that's kind of what I mean here. When you're so enmeshed in the experience that you don't really realize that your stress is becoming chronic. So what's actually so wrong with it? What's damaging about the chronic stress aspect of things? So firstly, that excessive cortisol production. As we said, a little bit of cortisol, happy days, big clap, promotion. Excessive cortisol production, then with chronic stress, they remain elevated. So over time, excess cortisol levels lead to increased inflammation dispersed across the body systemically. So increased inflammation. If you have any itis type of conditions, pains and aches, joints, anything that basically is going to respond to inflammatory markers, gut problems, getting nervous belly, anxious belly, stress belly, all of those things are tied in. Weight gain around the abdomen, and that would tie into about 30% of increased risk of obesity. So here you're looking at the excessive cortisol and adrenaline production messing with blood sugars and insulin response. We're getting into the hormones aspect of things just ever so slightly. Cortisol in and of itself will have, I think it's social media talks about it quite a bit now, cortisol belly, which is essentially if you're not really carrying excessive weight around any other part of your body, but finding that you've a little bit of a apple shape, that can be an indicator of excess cortisol in the bodies. And insulin resistance, heightened risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So about 45% increase in risk, which is huge, really. So your brain and mental health effects. Long-term stress will physically reshape your brain, which is scary because I'd hate to see what kind of shapes I've molded it into over specific stressful periods. So high cortisol can actually shrink your hippocampus, which is your brain's memory center. So remember, when there's a little bit of it, it improves performance, improves memory, improves cognitive function. But really, because it's not a natural state to be at that level all the time, it can actually shrink your hippocampus, so your brain's memory center, which leads to poor memory, poorer focus. So according to the Journal of Neuroscience, chronic stress can reduce cognitive function by nearly a quarter, so 25%. Psychologically, you'll notice things like anxiety, irritability, emotional fatigue, and reduced motivation or joy, because essentially your body has had enough and it can't really dip into the lateral ways of thinking and being that would involve creativity, that would involve forward planning. Everything's just about that zeroed in that I mentioned. It's all you can see is right now and not really have the capability to project forward into the future, which is necessary for things like motivation, joy, and having a good time overall. So your immune system, how does the chronic stress aspect affect it? So it weakens it. Spoiler alert. So chronic stress weakens your immune system, increasing susceptibility to illnesses. If you find yourself picking up all the coughs and colds and sniffles and chesties and taking ages to shift things, start to think, have I been under additional stress over the last couple of weeks, couple of months, hopefully not a couple of years? Are there lifestyle and behavioral environmental things happening that are causing these kind of increases in my body's stress response, which essentially think of it like if a castle was being stormed constantly, right? Dangers all around, and all of the forces have to go to defending it. All of the provisions have to go to defending the fort. Inside is not getting, inside the, what do they call it, a fort or a castle, something. The too much of the provisions are going to help to fortify the defenses. It's not really going to be a where am I going with this analogy? It's not going to be a place of, a bun feast and everything happening that's really looking after the people inside. I don't know where I went with that analogy, but here we go. So essentially, when you're under stress, your immune system is kind of under duress constantly. So in short, stress is a very, very helpful alarm system. But if the alarm stays on indefinitely, your body starts to suffer. And I think about being around an ongoing alarm constantly, your brain would be melted. So how do you recognize your own personal stress signals? And I've just popped in the Delphic maxim here, know thyself. So everyone has very, very specific ways to recognize that they're starting to go into chronic stress. There are a few kind of blanket general ones, things like I've mentioned, things like coughs and cold, sleep being interrupted, irritability going up, upset stomachs, not really wanting to take part in things socially, being a little bit mithered, energy levels being down. So all of these can be some indications that you're starting to undergo chronic stress effects. But caveat on that is it is very, very, very personal. You might be chronically stressed but never have an upset stomach. You might be chronically stressed but never have difficulty with your sleep. So start to recognize and zoom back into your own life and find some instances where you were under chronic stress and start to investigate and be curious about what was different. How did I behave differently than I do in a time where I feel very good, I feel very in control, I feel very relaxed and confident in my life? Start to see, do you have key indicators? Being quite abrupt, that's one of mine. If I'm chronically stressed, I probably am a little bit more abrupt with people. That's one of the first things I notice. I could be in my own head about an awful lot of things, but I have that feedback signal that people say to me, oh, you're a bit more irritable than usual. So your duration and your resolution. So positive stress resolves once the event is over. If you're seeing these types of stressful things, carry on. Chronic stress stays even when there's nothing immediate happening. So remember, ask yourself, am I still anxious about something well after the event has passed? That can be a good trigger for you an alert system for you to see, is it shifting into chronic stress? Short bursts of stress are important, like we've said, to get yourself to peak performance mode. Daily overwhelming anxiety is not. It is not going to help you in any way, shape, or form. So do you feel continuously overwhelmed, anxious, tense? All of the kind of key emotional and psychological indicators that something's tipping into the chronic stress aspect of things. Look for things like frequent headaches, stomach issues, poor sleep, constant fatigue, because we don't realize how much energy being mithered, what's another word for that? Gone. Mulling things over. I can't remember the proper terminology for it. Mulling things over takes an awful lot of brain processing, brain energy. So it's very, very depletive. Another thing that most people will notice, and I usually ask if I notice it when I'm speaking to participants, when they say I've been craving just sweets, craving chocolate, crisps, carbohydrates, things that are high sugar. There's two reasons there. First, the stress is bringing down your energy, your brain is going to go, I remember glucose gives me a very sharp burst of energy. I'm going to push the button to want more carby foods. Things that you say, Jeepers, I don't know why. I've been doing so well with things, and this week's been very stressful at work, and I'm finding myself going for all the wrong foods. And I know that they're all the wrong foods, but I just can't seem to stop myself. That's a huge indication that your stress is tipping into chronic stress, and that your brain needs constant glucose to fuel that level of gone again, mulling things over. So look out for those kind of indications with things. Irritability, persistent worry, trouble focusing would all be huge indicators. So the good news with all of this essentially is that you can leverage your positive stress towards setting healthy boundaries and limitations when you start to notice. It is incredibly important that you recognize your own ways of functioning. It's the best way to get through it, because blanket advice, as I've said, won't touch everybody. There are very specific ways that you react that's different from somebody else. And I'd also invite, if you're comfortable with it, asking people that you know, love and trust to say, do I seem a little bit more... That's if you are very stressed, that could be a tricky conversation to get into. So stress can still be, friend, not foe, if it's used wisely. How can you leverage the positive stress without crossing the line? So build stress awareness. That is, if you take anything from today, take that away. Pay attention to your own body's signals and signs of stress. Notice your breathing, your tension in your body, your emotions. If you find it difficult to remember these things, write little notes to yourself, or otherwise put little reminders in your phone to go off at maybe an hour, 2 hour intervals, just to say, notice how you are, and scan through psychologically, emotionally, physically, all of the different bits, and give yourself little prompts if you find it difficult to notice when you're in the throes of it, because most people do. Reframe stress positively where possible. So research by Stanford psychologist called Kelly McGonigal shows that simply viewing stress as helpful rather than harmful can shift you out of its negative effects. So people who positively reframed their stress had a 23% reduction in stress-related symptoms. So remind yourself, I'm experiencing this, I should say, because it matters and I'm prepared to handle it. So this is your body's way of telling you this matters. There is a performance aspect of things. And on the back of that, not all reframing is always helpful. So if you find yourself in a situation that's incredibly difficult, every single day is difficult, I would be remiss to say, look on the bright side, reframe it, it's positive. Are there situations, conversations, and environments that maybe just need to change, or there needs to be a conversation, there needs to be a little shift? Because if it is affecting your psychological, emotional, physical well-being over and over and over, it deserves your attention. And I do recognize that the things that stress us oftentimes are usually situations that we find difficult to talk about. If you find yourself in that position, practice the conversation with a friend, if you have a counselor, or somebody prior to having it beforehand. Oftentimes, what's that Steven Seagal says, the fear of death, the anticipation of death is worse than death itself, kind of thing. So prioritize your rest and your recovery. And sometimes I'm in sessions with individuals and they'll say, I'm so stressed, I have no time to myself. And I say, okay, what are things that make you feel relaxed? And what are activities that you do to make time for yourself? And they'll list out a few things. And I say, how often have you done those in the last 2 to 3 weeks? And they'll go, no times, actually. So sometimes it's just about taking these as, think of them as like replenishing the tank. There are very specific things individual to you that make you feel good, that make you feel landed, and prioritize these as things that counterbalance you feeling very, very unwell, right? And that's where you don't want to go. You don't want to let things carry on to the point where, some of the things we mentioned, it becomes chronic illness and everything is after getting a little bit large. So if there are ways that you can do a quick injection of a remedy of that by taking a walk by yourself, by watching a show for yourself that you say, I'm going to turn off my phone. I'm going to just go for a walk, turn off my phone, in the daylight, letting people know where I'm going. If there are specific things that make you feel good, happy, and rejuvenated, inject those into your weeks as if they are as important as food, because essentially they are. So align stress with your values. When stress starts to come up, ask, what is this stress trying to show me? And this is a bit more, I suppose, not quite advanced, but I realize that it won't suit everybody, but really looking at what is this signaling for me is a fantastic way to basically leverage it to be genuinely something positive for you, not just positive affirmation, something good for you. But how does this connect to, am I seeing a boundary here that I didn't know I had? Am I seeing, I feel like somebody's disrespecting me. Okay, I recognize that I'm stressed because I feel disrespected. I now know that respect is very important to me. How do I engage in a meaningful conversation that shows that respect is important to me, for example? So if you view stress through this kind of compassionate lens, it shifts your relationship with it from this kind of resistance to understanding. What is this stress telling me? Is it telling me I'm spreading myself too thin, like a bit of butter over too much toast, or whatever Bilbo Baggins says? So stress itself isn't all bad. There is lots of positive attributes to short-lived bursts of stress, right? They basically signal to us peak performance time, big clap, great, very, very in the moment, very, very focused. Now, our natural state is not to stay at that peak, right? It's a peak for a reason. It's there for a little while. It needs to come down. If you start to see that it is not coming down afterwards, chronic stress seriously impacts physical, mental, and emotional health. So recognizing your personal signs of chronic stress versus positive stress and starting to take gentle action early. Use reframing where it's needed. Take a hard look at the situation and say, look, do I need to make some changes here? Take recovery breaks, conscious recovery breaks that actually mean something to you. I know if somebody said to me, get up every hour and stretch in my environment, that would make very little difference to me. To me, it would have to be, I need to write things out because I need to process how I think. So pick and choose all the different advice that's out there that suits you. If something doesn't work for you, try something else. Don't feel that you have to kind of beat your head up against a wall if it's not the specific avenue for you. If taking deep breaths makes you feel, you might have asthma or breathing problems, you say, actually, that stresses me out way more. Go for a walk or whatever it may be. So taking care to really inject conscious moments into your week where they're designed to counteract stress and allowing yourself that little bit of spaciousness with it, right? I hope you found this helpful. I don't know where I was going with my analogies today, lads, so my apologies. And I hope you have a relaxing week with little peaks and troughs of peak performances as opposed to chronic stressors. We will see you again next week. Have a lovely rest of your week. Bye now.